How I discovered the secret to investing in property. When I purchased my first buy-to-let property, I was working full-time at Ernst & Young as a trainee auditor and living in London. I thought there was no way I could invest in central London as property prices were very expensive, and buying a flat for say £400,000 would mean I would need a deposit of at least £100,000, and that's not including all the other costs. My first buy-to-let property I purchased for £84,000 in Birmingham. I studied economics at the University of Birmingham and so spent 3 years there, so I knew the area to a certain extent. I knew there was strong rental demand with reasonably priced properties, well, when compared to central London. I started buying properties the traditional way, whereby I was slowly saving money. Once I had enough, I would buy a property, but this was slow and tied up a lot of money. In the last 3 years, I have supercharged my property portfolio using the secret I've discovered, where I'm able to buy properties at a lot of value and then recycle as much money as possible to use for the deposit on the next property. This has allowed me to buy properties in a way which is much faster and requires a lot less money than the traditional way of investing in property. Please do me a quick favor and hit that subscribe button, it helps more than you think. Quick shout out to Your Property Network magazine for featuring me in the magazine. Please check out my article in the April edition. After completing my degree at the University of Birmingham, I was unsure about what I wanted to do, so I decided to take some time out and travel across North and South America, hoping I would find some inspiration. However, on my return, I was none the wiser. I applied to one of the accountancy firms and secured a position as an auditor with Ernst & Young. My father-in-law owned a nightclub in Birmingham and used to invest in property. He shared many stories with me about the houses they had back in the day, which piqued my interest in investing in property. In 2009, I attended a free weekend property training course with Tigrant, now known as Legacy, and met someone who I instantly clicked with. We decided to sign up for further training together, splitting the £30,000 price tag. It was a classroom-based course in Richmond and covered many different modules whilst focusing on momentum investing, buying at a 25% discount, pulling your money out of the deal to invest in the next property. I'm from Letchworth, Hertfordshire originally, where property prices were a lot more expensive than Birmingham. Hence, I decided to invest there. I was concerned about my first buy-to-let with regards with what to do with the property and how much money I was going to need for the deposit and refurbishment. My first one was a 3-bedroom terraced house I bought for £84,000, which had a monthly rental income of £575, providing a yield of nearly 9%. It needed some refurbishment, but I didn't refinance. Back then, I was what you would call an armchair investor because I was still working. I purchased a few more properties in Birmingham in this way, putting down a 25% deposit and doing a little refurb work. Nothing structural, no new kitchens and bathrooms. I was nervous about the costs and timescales because I didn't have the time to project manage the work myself. I quit my job in 2016 and I didn't have another job or anything else in place. I didn't want to commute into London, so I started to research alternative options in property. I considered HMOs in Stevenage because they were very popular at that point, but I soon realised that the numbers didn't stack for me. I made the decision to focus on serviced accommodation instead. I set up my service accommodation business at the start of 2017, providing accommodation in Stevenage and Welwyn Garden City on a rent-to-rent basis. There were a couple of large developments in the town centre, and many of the apartments have been purchased by international investors who also furnished them with furniture packs. We built up a good relationship with the agency that managed the block, enabling us to secure them to manage. The amount of funds involved in setting up the business was minimized due to the apartments being fully furnished, so our initial investment was just the first month's rent plus a few other items and soft furnishings. We contacted some of the local corporate companies such as GlaxoSmithKline and Airbus and asked if they had any employees that were coming on secondment. Employees were fed up of staying in hotels for months on end, and although they had tried housing them in HMOs, it hadn't worked very well. Initially, the agents were a little uneasy about about the types of tenants in the apartments, but we reassured them that we would be doing corporate lets. When we first started managing the apartments, we were doing most things ourselves, including the cleaning. As the business grew, we moved to use cleaners and linen companies and listed the apartments on Airbnb, as there were times when they were available between corporate stays. We built a screening process and were taking bookings that were longer than 5 nights to ensure we had the right type of guest. As we built the systems to support the business, we also started to offer management services to other landlords. We continued doing this for 2 years, and in 2019 we decided to reinvest back into property to build our own portfolio. I was missing London and the buzz of traveling and wanted to spend a little more time there. So we decided to look at investing in central London. Of course, the prices were very different to Birmingham, and I needed to get over that obstacle in terms of my thought process and mindset of buying something more expensive. I heard that someone was buying studio apartments in Knightsbridge that had 2 windows, and they were installing a partition to create a 1-bedroom apartment. I thought this sounded like a great way to add value. So I also looked for studio apartments in central London. It was harder than it looked. A lot of the studios were 30 square meters and sometimes even smaller. From a lending and refinancing viewpoint, it was going to be difficult because at the time they needed to be at least 30 square meters or more, otherwise they weren't mortgageable. I researched the cheapest 1 and 2 bedroom flats, which tended to be situated in ex-council high-rise blocks. I viewed several and spoke to my broker, who advised me that many lenders don't like high rises. For the refinancing, this could mean the value being capped at 60 to 65% due to desirability. This wouldn't work for me either. I did more research to find an alternative and came across low-level blocks that had about 5 floors. Some were good sizes, well built and in great locations, and some had high ceilings and a separate kitchen. I realized that if I moved the kitchen across to the other side, I could create an open plan kitchen diner and then convert it from a 1-bedroom apartment into a 2-bedroom apartment. I asked my broker about the potential mortgageability of them, and he advised that the lender would look at the proportion of private versus council ownership. In many of the blocks, the tenants had purchased the apartments through the right to buy scheme, so this would work well as a strategy. Talking to some of the agents during the viewings was quite challenging. If I asked them what the flat would be worth if it was a 2-bed, they just said it wouldn't be worth much more, as I wasn't going to be adding any square footage. I experienced this with 3 or 4 agents, so I rephrased my question and instead asked how much a 2-bed in the block was worth. The ground rent and service charges were typically cheaper than the privately owned flats, which ticked another box. It's important to talk to your broker about your plans. It would have been a real shock had I moved forward with some of the properties that I had viewed. I would have found out about difficulties in refinancing or only being able to achieve a lower loan to value far too late. We were lucky with our first purchase in Battersea, achieving an 80% loan to value mortgage on the property. Prior to purchasing, we like to speak to the freeholder about consent for the works, providing details of the existing and planned floor plans and confirmation that the works would be signed off by London Building Control. Some would confirm acceptance in principle, others wouldn't do it pre-purchase because I wasn't yet the leaseholder. We have also paid £200 for the freeholder's consent. When we met the surveyor for the refinance valuation, we prepared a pack showing the before and after plans with photographs. On one occasion, we received a nil valuation, requiring us to approach a different lender. It's frustrating because sometimes they don't provide feedback on the reasons why. This happened to us in a project in Vauxhall. We purchased the property for £290,000 and got a nil valuation, but eventually it was valued at £390,000 at 80% loan to value. During COVID, I wasn't traveling into central London anymore, so I wanted to see what I could do locally in Hertfordshire. We bought a house in Stevenage to split into 2 flats with separate entrances. The purchase price was £265,000, and after 6 months, it was valued at £410,000. We split the title and created a lease for each apartment. The freehold was put into a different name so that the ownership of the lease and the freeholder weren't under the same names, and we were able to get the best deal for the refinance. Whilst London was severely impacted during lockdown, we were fortunate that we had a lot of SA bookings in Hertfordshire, which were insurance bookings for people who needed to move out of their homes temporarily. In London, our guests had mostly been business travellers or tourists, so it was very quiet. Although we did get some bookings from people needing to isolate or receiving hospital treatment, there were so many empty SA units in London that we had to reduce the price almost by half to get some bookings. Bookings have now started to increase, although I would wouldn't say we're back to pre-pandemic levels yet. Just before the first lockdown in 2020, we were in the process of purchasing a flat in West Hampstead, but the bridging lender decided to pull out just before we exchanged, so we had to find an alternative quickly. The purchase price was £303,000 for a 1-bedroom flat, and we reconfigured it to a 2-bedroom flat. 6 months later, it was valued at £450,000. Having reviewed our portfolio and projects, the uplift value over 6 months has typically been £100,000. We are continuing to focus on projects in the Stevenage area, and we purchased a house to convert into 4 flats at the end of last year. For that one, planning took 15 weeks, and we have some conditions that need to be discharged on the planning. It took a further 6 weeks to confirm the type of brick we could use for the back extension. It helped that we were able to communicate with Stevenage Council via email, whereas in London, everything is controlled and managed through a portal. I call my secret the B4R model. Everyone talks about buy, refurbish, refinance, rent, but I reconfigure as well, hence B4R. Irrespective of whether it's in London or not, it's always important to see how you can add value to a property. From experience, I've found that adding another bedroom, whether that's to a flat in London or a house in Hertfordshire, helped me achieve a good uplift. Persistence is key, as is knowing your criteria in terms of what you want. Keeping this in mind and with my research allowed me to create a secret that works for me. Please keep this secret to yourself. It will be our little secret.